Let's start by planning the conditional access for Azure Virtual Desktop. Azure AD Premium, it does have a feature called Conditional Access. With the Conditional Access, we can analyze our signals or all the signals that are hitting the Azure Active Directory. Either is it a user or the location of the user, either it's specific applications that the user is using, and the device as well. So whatever those kind of factors, with the benefit of Azure Active Directory Premium and the conditional access, we will be able to analyze these signals, and then depend on this, we will understand if this signal is risky or not. So we can take a kind of automated decision to enforce a specific access policy. This access policy can be allow the access, requiring the MFA, or block the access at all. You can use the conditional access policy to apply specific access control on the user. So let's assume that this user is in a risky state, or I need to apply the multi-factor authentication for all users. Simply, once I request the multi-factor authentication from all the users using the conditional access, whoever is logging into the Azure Virtual Desktop or any related application that is part of the conditional access, they would require to proceed forward with multi-factor authentication activity. And once they are challenged for the MFA and they are authorized, they will be able to access the service itself. Also, conditional access policy allow you to promote the user with the MFA whenever needed. It's like, I would assume that this user is logged in daily basis from the office network parameter. So I don't need the user to be like frustrating from the security requirement. So I won't request the user to do any kind of MFA or challenge a user for MFA whenever they are in the network boundary related to our organization. In such a situation, I will identify our public IPs related to the office network, and then I will specify that I don't need to apply the MFA on the user whenever they are within this network. Whenever the user is out of this network, please apply the MFA. So this is how I can utilize the conditional access for a specific activity. Also, Microsoft by default provide you a standard conditional policies that it's called as a security policy. However, it's kind of like it's a basic security level. So any new organization getting access to Azure Active Directory, by default, the security default is being applied. So as a part of the security defaults, you will get a kind of like multi-factor authentication requirement for all the user. All the users are required to register themselves and get the multi-factor authentication activated and function. Once they are okay, this is like the first level of security. Again, you can add additional layer of security using the conditional access, customize the security configuration depending on your requirement to meet the business need. So what kind of benefits we can get from conditional access policy? Actually, conditional access policy by default, it's increasing the user productivity. So you would only interrupt the user whenever a specific signal is met. Let's say this user is in a risky situation or this device is not trusted. They will be challenged for MFA or even the access will be blocked. So here you are not really interrupting the user every time they are accessing the services when they are using a trusted device or when they are on a right position. Okay, managing the risk. You would automate the risk assignment for the user. So let's say this user is in a risk situation. Once this risk is being identified, if it's like high, let's block the access. If it's medium, let's require MFA. If it's low, do nothing, let's say. Additional benefit is the address and compliance. Additional benefit is address compliance and governance. Gives you the ability to audit access application from the perspective of terms. So if the user is accepting such terms, you would allow the user to access the service. If they didn't accept the terms, you can restrict them from access the service itself. Another benefit is managing the cost. Moving all the access policy to Azure Active Directory, it reduces the on-premises solution requirement. Let's say you have on-premises 𝒉𝒆𝒄𝒌 solution or on-premises conditional access system, and then you have one on Azure. With moving to Azure Active Directory, you're gonna reduce the dependency on such solution, and you will just use the Azure Active Directory Premium service. Okay, so what is our requirement or the prerequisite to get the conditional access function with Azure Virtual Desktop? We would require Active Directory, which is Azure Active Directory tenant with a premium license, which is P1 or P2. And then we would require account that it does have access permission as a conditional access administrator. Also, we would require account for testing, which can be any standard account, and also group that it does have this standard account. So we will utilize this group as a part of the policy configuration. Before we move to the demo and start configuring the conditional access itself, let's understand the conditional access policy component. So let's make it simple. Conditional access policy, it's a kind of like if then statement. So if something, do something. So if any statement is met, let's say like as we highlighted, a user in a risk state or the device platform is none of the supported ones, then the control will be block the access, let's say, or require MFA. Okay, so as simple as this, if then statement, that's mean if the assignment is met, then apply the access. That's it. When we will go for the portal and start configuring the conditional access, we will have two tabs. So the first tab is called assignment, where we will specify the assignment itself that we would require this to be met. And then we have another tab which is called the access control, where we will specify the action itself. So if the assignment is met, the access control has to be 1, 2, 3. Let's say if the user is from this group and opening this application from this location, grant the access or block the access. This is how the statement should be. In the assignment tab, we have to identify the user or the group that will be affected by the policy. We will identify the cloud app that will be affected by the policy as well. And also we will identify the condition, which is if this device is within this location, if the user is using a legacy app, if the user is using a trusted device. So this is where the condition will be part of the configuration. And then on the access control tab, we will determine if we're gonna grant the access or we will block the access. Also, we will determine what kind of session limitation we will apply. Let's say it's one time allow, or it's limited for a specific period, whatever it is. So on the access control, you have option to grant and block, and you have access to control the session limit. Now it's time for you as an architect or as a consultant to ask your customers the right questions so you can plan the conditional access properly for your Azure Virtual Desktop. It's a very straightforward and it's well-known questions that we have to identify so we can build our policy properly. First of all, who should access the resource? So we have to identify who should be having the capability to access the Azure Virtual Desktop itself, and what the resource will be accessible, which is the Azure Virtual Desktop, and under which condition. Again, as we highlighted, trusted device, specific client desktop under a specific location with a specific risk status. All this kind of configuration, it should be answered under the condition. As we highlighted earlier, those policies can be allowing you to block the access or to grant the access. So be sure that you are asking the right question. So you will grant to the right people and you will block the wrong people. And at the end, for sure, you are achieving your goal. Document all the answers from the customer perspective and put them in your HLD. So it will be your guide for building the right policy for Azure Virtual Desktop. When it comes to users and the group, you have to start identifying the user and the group will be excluded and included on the policy itself. If there is a requirement for a specific directory rule or external user, this has to be identified as well. When I say directory rule, I mean a specific access permission or a specific user role permission. Let's say this user is administrator or global administrator, or let's say conditional access administrator. Those level of directory rules will be included or excluded. This has to be in your questionnaire as well. When it comes to the cloud application and actions, identify all the applications that will be accessed, which is gonna be on our situation, the Azure Virtual Desktop. So once you identify the application, you have to identify which subject, so this application will be excluded or included. So when it comes to the condition, which device platform will be included and excluded. So let's say I need to include Windows, I need to exclude Mac, I need to include the iOS, I need to exclude the Android. So this kind of device platform can be part of this question. And the next question is, what is the trusted location? So I can, let's say my organization is looking for only specific country to be allowed to access this application, only specific IP addresses to be allowed to access this location, other than this will be restricted. What is the device state? So if the device is in on such a state, allow the access, which is like trust state. If the device is not in trust state, exclude the access. Again, what is the client application type? So if I need a desktop client, a web client, if it's a web client, exclude the access or restrict the access. If it's a desktop client, allow the access. This kind of questions as well has to be identified as a part of your planning for Azure Virtual Desktop configuration. So when you start creating the conditional access, this is how it looks like. You will have to identify the conditional policy name. It's recommended to have a specific criteria, let's say the organization name and then the policy name and then the action itself. So let's say this policy, it's for organization 1 and this organization, let's say Contuso. So Contuso dash the policy itself, which is let's say conditional access for MFA. And then will be the actual control, if it's gonna be grant or session limit or block, whatever it is. This is how you should have your naming standard for the policy itself. You would have the users and the group, so you would have to identify which user will access and which user will be excluded, same for groups. And then the application, which is gonna be AVD in our session. And also I will highlight the application ID, because instead of searching by the name, it would be better to search by the application ID here, which will identify the Azure Virtual Desktop for you. And then you will have to identify the condition, which is, again, as we highlighted earlier, the device platform is the location, the client app, the device state. And when it comes to the access control, we will identify if we're gonna grant or block. And for the session, we will identify if the session will be for a specific time period or it will be, there is a lot of session configuration under the session tab as well. So let's jump to the portal and start creating our first conditional access for Azure Virtual Desktop.